Just days after the Supreme Court heard oral arguments on the constitutionality of the Affordable Care Act, President Obama used a news conference question as an opportunity to make further arguments. I'm PJTV's Scott Ott, joined now by Stephen Green and Bill Whittle. Men, the president reminded us and the court that this decision is not just a legal question. It affects people's lives, and that the individual mandate to buy insurance is necessary to fund coverage for people with pre-existing conditions. Then he added this.
Ultimately, I'm confident that the Supreme Court will not take what would be an unprecedented, extraordinary step of overturning a law that was passed by a strong majority of a democratically elected Congress. And I just remind conservative commentators that for years what we've heard is the biggest problem on the bench was judicial activism or a lack of judicial restraint, that an unelected group of people would somehow overturn a duly constituted and passed law.
Oh, man! It's the timing. It's that clock-like Richard Pryor timing that makes that so hilarious. Wow.
Balls like church bells on this guy. Goodness.
Well, Stephen, you know, they now think, the audience now thinks that we were talking about something while the president was talking. No, we were just listening to the president. Stephen Green, our viewers recall when this president used his State of the Union address to rebuke the high court over an election finance ruling, and now he's telling the court what to do before they've even written their opinions on the Obamacare case. Is this a proper use of what Teddy Roosevelt would call the bully pulpit?
Well, you know, and I think I learned this from you, Scott. Teddy Roosevelt meant bully as in good, bully good, which, you know, was the slang of the time. Obama, he's just acting like a bully, like a Chicago bully. And that line about the Supreme Court being unelected, that's news. Let me tell you some news. More than 60 Democrats who voted for Obamacare, they're unelected now, too, after 2010. And you know what? The last time a president showed the court this much disrespect, and this part's serious, it was Andrew Jackson, and it led to the Trail of Tears, one of the most shameful acts in American history. But, you know, Jackson said the Chief Justice has his opinion, and I have mine. But Obama isn't even giving the court that much recognition. He's trying to discredit the entire institution to bring the court down to his personal level. And it's not going to work. It better not work.
Yeah, I half expect that he's going to start nominating new people to take over because those geezers just can't handle the workload. Can you say FDR? Bill Whittle, the president is correct in a sense that the Obamacare bill passed the Senate with 60 votes, a supermajority. And after all, what right do 5 unelected judges have to tell a majority of the people's representatives that they can't pass whatever laws they choose?
You're not going to get a big argument from me on this one. If you look at the history of the Supreme Court was never intended to be, at least originally, according to the framers, was never intended to rule on the constitutionality of law, at least as I understand it. My understanding was they darn near fought a second revolution over this 10 or 20 years into the nation's history. It was essentially just supposed to be the final court. If there's nowhere else to go, that's it. You couldn't go any higher. That was the last court. This idea that they're the guardians of constitutionality is a pretty recent thing. However, with that said, people, I know President Obama, just a perfect example. You conservative hypocrites who can't stand judicial activism should really be against overturning this abomination of constitutional authority. It's not hard to explain, Mr. President. There's certainly no hypocrisy involved. Conservatives tend to look at the Constitution as, you know, the law. And we tend to look at any rulings that are in line with the ultimate law of the land as legal, and anything that contravenes what's the clear language of the Constitution as illegal. So if we are against you using the Supreme Court to create law where there wasn't one, yeah, we're against that. If, on the other hand, the ruling is saying this law does not adhere to foundational First Amendment, Second Amendment, Fifth Amendment rights, whatever, well, we're in favor of it. It's not really so hard to understand.
Well, Stephen, from a purely political perspective, the president is showing some swagger here. I mean, almost daring the court to overturn Obamacare, not shrinking from it in an election year. What should the Republican presidential candidates be saying at this point?
You know, they don't have to do a whole lot right now. Just let Obama go, let him speak. People, by vast majorities, think the country is headed in the wrong direction. Big majorities think the president's policies are just wrong, even though he maintains some personal popularity. Nobody likes Congress. Nobody trusts the media. You know what? There are only two institutions in this country that still command any respect from the people. That's the military and the Supreme Court. So if this tiny little spiteful man wants to run against the Supreme Court, I say let him, and then the whole country will see what the rest of the world figured out 2-3 years ago, that this tiny little man-child sitting in the Oval Office, and the sooner he's gone, the better.
Amen.
Well, Bill Whittle, the president's arguments were political and practical, but he didn't tell us why Obamacare is constitutionally permissible. Now, as a former constitutional law lecturer and former editor of the Harvard Law Review, why didn't he just come out and make the constitutional case for Obamacare?
Oh, man, what a softball. Well, first of all, Scott, it's not that he doesn't understand the Constitution, it's just that he doesn't like it. We know from that radio show where he talked about the fundamental flaw with the Constitution is that it somehow limits government. Whoa, got to get rid of that. Secondly, he can't make the case because he knows it's not constitutional. They all knew it was not constitutional. But I think the real story in this whole thing is, at least in this point in the ongoing timeline of this Obamacare debacle, is how amazed liberals are. Nancy Pelosi is stunned. Barack Obama is terrified and petrified. And all of these liberal commentators, Chris Matthews is like, you mean these wingnuts who've been talking about this thing not being constitutional? You're trying to tell me they have some sort of basis in reality? They live in a bubble. They live in an echo chamber where everything is the way you want it to be. You just say it often enough, put your fingers in your ears, and just repeating it's going to be true. A little dose of reality wouldn't hurt these people, and it sure would be a great thing for the American people.
Well, Barack Obama seems to have studied constitutional law, as Bill suggested, for the same reason you and I might study the history of communism, to understand it in order to make sure that it never takes hold here. Everything the president said about the Supreme Court and Obamacare is either demonstrably false or simply irrelevant. Everything. If the court overturns Obamacare, it won't be unprecedented or extraordinary. The court has struck down more than 165 federal laws. It doesn't matter how many members of Congress voted for the law because we live in a constitutional republic. What matters is the supreme law of the land. Whether Obamacare lives or dies without the individual mandate has nothing to do with whether the law is constitutional. With that kind of circular logic, Congress could justify almost any breach of liberty. And finally, judicial activism is when the court writes its own laws or finds new and imaginary governmental powers hidden within the Constitution. But when the court corrals the passions and powers of politicians behind the fence of freedom's charter, that's judicial restraint. For Bill Whittle, Stephen Green, and the entire Trifecta crew at PJTV.com, I'm Scott Ott.